heading into the Easter season, and it's time for us to reflect on some important things that we stand on and things that we hold dear as believers. Jim read to us Romans 5 and noted how significant that little passage was, that there is so much depth of truth within those 11 verses. Though we'll not spend all of our time there, I do want us to be considering the notion of what Easter and the cross and Good Friday are about. I've simply entitled this message this morning, as we begin to reflect and to remember and to be reminded about the cross, I've just put a question mark there. The cross? Because this was a question that people in Jesus' day had. Why the cross? What does that have to do with anything? In fact, to this day, people are wondering about the cross. What in the world do we celebrate and talk about the cross? What is the deal with the cross? Why the cross? Well, in Jesus' day, the curiosity came because they were expecting a leader, a king. And the cross was the last thing they would have expected of their king. You are probably aware of the fact that today is what we call Palm Sunday. That is to say, 1 week before Good Friday, the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem. As John records it in John chapter 12, verse 12, the next day the large crowd had come to the feast, heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, crying out, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." The King of Israel. This was their thought. If you know the history of Israel, you know that God had put David on the throne and said that he would establish a kingdom that would last forever. It didn't. Solomon was the king for 40 years, and then there was a split in the kingdom. There was a series of kings that were there and not there, and they were good and they were bad, and Jerusalem would remain to be the capital city, but Israel was no longer a superpower. And they had been told by God's promise himself that there would always be a throne, there would always be someone on the throne, that there would always be a king, and that king would rule and reign, and they were confused. The kings had come, the kings had gone, but where was the king now? Why was there no king in Israel? They were now being ruled by Rome. And the political situation was such that Rome had come in and they had taken over much of the known world. They ruled them with an iron fist. They allowed them to keep their religion. They allowed them to do their little thing, whatever it was, and worship your God in your corner. But they were subservient to Rome. Where is the king? God had promised that there would be someone to rule over Israel for all time. They knew that there had been a promise, and they knew that there had been prophecies, that there had been mention of a king who would come to rule and reign forever. One example of this is the famous words of Psalm 2, which to our Gentile ears doesn't sound much like a prophecy, but to the ears of a Jew, this was a messianic psalm. Psalm 2, by the way, piece of trivia for you, is the most quoted psalm in the New Testament. The most explained psalm and pointing the most to the Lord Jesus. Psalm 2, verse 1, asks the question, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? Israel was, at the time of the writing of this psalm, was transitioning to a new king. And so the time that another empire would pounce on you was the time when a young king, a fresh face, would show up on the political horizon. Now they're weak. Now they're trying to get themselves together. Now they don't quite have their military. Maybe people are against this new king. Now is the time to take them out. And this is where the psalm begins. The nations are raging against Israel. The peoples are plotting against Israel. But it says, in vain. The kings of the earth set themselves against the rulers and take counsel together. They're murmuring and making secret plans. They've got spies to go into the land. They're planning and plotting against the Lord and against his, capital A, anointed. That's the Hebrew idea of the chosen one. the Messiah. That's what the word Christ means. Jesus, we add the title Christ, it means anointed one. This is a direct reference to this idea that there would be one who would rule and reign forever. Against the Lord and against his anointed they're plotting. Let us burst their bonds apart and cast their cords away. The psalm goes on to say how God laughs at such a notion, as if you can come against me. And then, leaping down into verse 8 of Psalm 2, ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage. Ask who of what? And the ends of the earth your possession. Who gets the nations as an inheritance? Who receives them as a possession? It's the Messiah. And the Jews knew this. And he's going to come and he's going to rule over all the nations. And verse 9, you shall break them. This is the anointed one, the king. You shall break them with a rod of iron. This is poetic language. And dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now that's an image that's very clear. To rule with a rod of iron and to see the nations around you as pottery. Who's going to win? When you're wielding a rod of iron and you hold up a clay pot, which one is going to break? I ask you. It's kind of obvious. And that's the picture. And even if the clay pot decides to attack the iron rod, surprise, surprise, the iron rod will win. This is the imagery of the Messiah. He is going to come with an iron rod. He will rule. He will be a king. So when Jesus comes on the scene, everybody is in a frantic state. Finally, the anointed one has arrived. And they're grabbing palm branches and they've heard people talking and they understand something of what people have been saying for centuries. And they're beginning to believe and to wonder, this is him. And so they're thrown into an emotional frenzy, and they get excited because the anointed one, the king, has arrived. The last thing on anybody's mind is the cross. That's why when Jesus spoke about it, the disciples were clueless. Matthew 16, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. What? This is not the anointed one, the king, who is going to rule with an iron rod of iron? What are you talking about, Jesus? And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Jesus grabs him. Can you see him off to the side? I got to tell you this, Jesus. You're a little Looney Tunes right now. I've got to straighten you out. I need to help you to understand who the Messiah is. What's all this talk about dying and rising? You're the Messiah. You're the king. You're the anointed one. Get your rod of iron and hop on the throne. That's not going to happen, is what he's saying. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord. This will never happen to you. You're the anointed one. They didn't get it. You know this famous rebuke. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Jesus was being obedient to the Father. And the Father's agenda for Jesus was to die on a cross. The cross? Question mark? Where does that come in? How does that fit into the scheme of a king, of a ruler, of one who would lead them in political power and make Israel a superpower? The cross? Well, if you're a New Testament believer this morning, you know that the cross is necessary for two reasons. The cross is necessary because of who God is and because of who we are. And they didn't see that. But as Jesus was nailed to that tree and was raised from the dead, a new understanding of what God had done came upon the church. And to this day, that understanding has caused us to celebrate year by year by year. We're gathering on Good Friday, the day that we commemorate that he was nailed to a cross. What in the world would make us want to celebrate that somebody is crucified? The cross? How do we think this is some glorious thing? The cross is necessary for two reasons. It is necessary because of who God is and because of who we are. Let me just remind you, this is the way God describes himself in Deuteronomy 32, verse 4. I mean, we could probably camp here for the day. The rock. What a great image. What a way to describe God. He's not a literal rock. People, don't get weird on me. It's just figurative language. What is a rock to you? You live in Muskoka. You know these are things that do not move. By and large, we're talking, I know it's not impossible to move one, and we've got dynamite to blow them up, but just in general terms, you understand? It's a foundation. It is immovable. It is unchanging. It is always there. It's a rock. It is solid. His way, his work is perfect. What a way to describe God. He's never done anything wrong, can never do anything wrong. Everything he does is with precision, with excellence, with supreme authority. All his ways are, this is where we should get nervous, justice. All his ways are justice. The way he administers this world, the way he rules and reigns over this world, he is a God of justice. You know what justice is. Some of you have been parents. Do you know what it is to walk into a room and see, somebody fuming with a tight little fist and somebody else holding their eye, and you're trying to work out, I wonder who hit who. And you know this is a moment when there needs to be justice. Whatever measure, as a parent, you choose, whether it's a timeout or, a taser or whatever you choose, you make your decision because you are not a parent who would say, oh, well, I know you tried your best. I know you didn't mean it. Let's just get along. What kind of a parent are you? That is not an act of love. That is an act of hate. By love, you respond in justice. That is natural in us. And God is no different. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity. Just and upright is he. Why the cross? Because of who God is. Do you remember the story in Genesis 18? There are a couple of cities that have captured God's attention because of their wickedness. And God, in his sovereignty, decides it is time for justice. He is not a right God to let things go. And so he comes to decide to respond to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. This is in the middle of the context. They're visiting Abraham and tell him what they're going to do. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom. But Abraham stood still before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, now, before I read this, I need to tell you that you've maybe been in school and had somebody say to you, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Well, that's not true. Because you're about to hear a stupid question. With all due respect to Abraham, he asks this question. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Abraham, don't be so dumb. Do you not know that God is a God of justice? He doesn't do anything wrong. He is perfect in the way he metes out that justice. He will never sweep away the righteous with the wicked. It cannot be so. It is impossible to be so because God's ways are just and excellent and supreme and full of integrity. He never would do such a thing. Why would you ask a question? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare for the 50 righteous who are in it? And so begins the conversation with God. And you know the answer, and he whittles it down. And he says, it doesn't matter how many righteous people, I will spare the city if there are any righteous people. Well, it so happens that God's justice falls on Sodom and Gomorrah, but not before he rescues the righteous people. Because God is a God of justice, of truth. Job 34:12 says, God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. Isaiah 5:16, but the Lord of hosts is exalted in justice, and the holy God shows himself holy in righteousness. This is who God is. He is not a God to turn his blind eye to iniquity, to sin, to false behavior, to those who have broken his commands. Verse 18 of Isaiah 30. Therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. Why is the cross necessary? It's in the character of God. He must punish sin. He has to. It cannot be overlooked. It cannot be sidestepped. It cannot be ignored. It cannot be just, well, you'll do better next time. God must, by his nature, respond to it. And it's because of who we are. Most of you know the concept of debt. You're probably thinking in terms immediately of economic debt. If you don't know economic debt of paying for a car, or paying your children's tuition off, or making a mortgage payment, well, let me tell you, you're really missing out on something super fun. You got to try it sometime. It's a blast. You get money from them, and then you pay back more money than they gave you. It's a great idea. We all just love this. It's called economic debt. If you've never experienced it, you really got to try it. It's top 10. It's how things go. And do you know what debt looks like? Interestingly enough, this concept of debt is often an imagery that the Bible uses in regards to the description of our relationship to God. It is seen, as it were, as debt. Debt that we have to pay. You know what economic debt looks like. Let me just give you a silly illustration that may distract you, but many of you have seen these little cards that have come off the side of a McDonald's coffee cup. It's a great little system that they've got to hook you in and keep you coming back, and, customer favoritism to your product. I mean, that's what they're trying to build you as a customer. It's a fantastic hook. So one day, I've got one of these all filled out. I'm all excited. Park the car, run inside. I slap this on the counter, and I would like a coffee, please. A free coffee. Well, I'm not about to order a small coffee. I'm not that stupid. If you're going to give me a free coffee, I'm like, have you got a swimming pool of coffee? I would like a swimming pool of coffee. I mean, if it's free, so I say, please give me your largest coffee. It's free. So the fellow turns around, fills up a extra large cup of coffee, turns back. This coffee is the biggest thing I've ever seen. I would never order a coffee this big, but it's free. He turns back to me. He hands me the coffee, and he says, that'll be 10 cents. I'm like, what part of free did I not understand? I didn't know this, and maybe it was not 10 cents, maybe it was 15. I don't remember, and if it's happened to you, you may know the price. But when you upsize to the largest free coffee, there's a small charge and for the free coffee. You probably have experienced this. I now know this. I've got it down pat. But this was my first experience in it. I had no money on me. I expected to get a free coffee. I had my credit card. There was no way I was putting 10 cents on a credit card. I'm standing there holding a cup of coffee, and I'm looking at the guy, and I go, I have got no money at all. Oh, great. I said, really, I have nothing. What do we do? So we both stand there looking at each other for a few minutes, and we're both thinking, it's only 10 cents. So what does he do? He calls the manager. That only makes sense to me. The manager comes over, and we begin a little discussion. What should we do? What's the situation? I'm kind of feeling stupid, and yet I'm not feeling stupid because it was supposed to be a free coffee. So I explain I don't have the 10 cents, and the manager kind of boop, 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 boop on the till and goes, okay, well, you know for next time we'll let it go this time. And you can feel the tension build in this high school student who now darts his eyes to the manager and glares like, this is coming out of my paycheck. I have to balance this at the end of the day. You can see the wheels turning. What do you mean it's okay? You can see him rising, not wanting to, and the tension of, should I say something? Should I not? You can see him, his body language is like, are you kidding me right now? It's not. So here the manager says, next time you come, and I go out, start sipping on my coffee. Let me ask you something. If I haven't distracted you completely, I'm talking about economic debt. In theory, I owed them 10 cents. Now, it was so minor, it's a quibble, and don't get lost in the fact that it's a small thing. Don't blow it off as if it doesn't matter. Hear me and listen and follow this track with me here. Somebody had to pay that debt. I wasn't getting off scot-free. Their till had to balance at the end of the day. They have to reconcile their books. Sure, it was 10 cents, but I walked away and that guy paid my debt. I was not going to get off. There's no such thing as a free coffee, especially at McDonald's. I went to the car, I did the thing that seemed sensible at the time, and you rummage through and you look in every nook and cranny. I found some change. I came back in, I got in line, I just slid the dime towards the kid. He thanked me like I had just given him $1,000. But you know what happened? I paid my debt because I owed that debt, and I had the ability to pay that debt. But let me ask you something. What happens when you do not have the ability to pay a debt? For example, what if it's not an economic debt? What if it is a moral debt? What if it so happened that instead of paying my 10 cents or knowing that I owed 10 cents, what if, just for the sake of illustration, and I'm not suggesting I would do this for such a foolish thing, but knowing perhaps that I owed the money, and as soon as I got the coffee in my hot little hand, pardon the pun, I'd turn around and flee like a thief and say, ha ha, 10 cents on you. Perhaps I would know that I was taking the coffee without paying. Would I have stolen 10 cents from them? Yes, I would. Would I have stolen the coffee in essence? Technically, yes, I would. Supposing I ran straight into the chest of the manager and now, of course, blast the coffee all over him. Oh, well, why are you in such a hurry? And then the clerk begins to explain why I'm running and what I just did, and suddenly I'm collared and dragged back. And I say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so embarrassed. Okay, here's your 10 cents. So I pay them the 10 cents. Now am I actually off the hook? No, don't be so foolish. You don't understand how this works. If I am a thief, I have stolen from them. And it does not matter if I pay back the money, I am still a thief. And I still owe them a moral debt that I have no way to pay. Now, granted, in a small thing like that you do, but talk about a big crime. Think about something very large. Think about taking somebody's life, for example. Heaven forbid this should even be a discussion here. How do you pay back a moral debt that can never be paid back? How is it that it's possible for us to borrow money to pay back an economic debt? But have you ever thought about the fact, or ask yourself the question, from whom can you borrow to pay a moral debt? Where do you go? This is the message of Christ, that you, that I are spiritually, morally bankrupt. Our account is below zero. you are in serious trouble because God is a God of justice. This is why we need the cross, because of who God is and because of who we are. And we are so good at convincing ourselves that our petty little peccadillos don't even matter. You like that word, don't you? It's an English word. Look it up. I'm not making it up. It means those little tiny little things that you think mean nothing, those little insignificant little 10 senses that don't mean anything to you, and you can just tell yourself, oh, so what? Everybody fudges on their taxes. Oh, so what? Everybody exaggerates when they tell the story and make themselves look better than they really are. Oh, so what? I didn't need to tell him or her the details, and so a little lie, whatever. Oh, so what? Doesn't really matter. You're so, with all due respect, so foolish that you would not understand the character of God. You are reducing God to a grandfather in heaven who is doty and stupid and doesn't know what's going on and cluelessly. You're just going to squeak on through because he's a doorknob and you're so fantastic. How stupid are you? Do you not know that the God who gave you eyeballs sees everything? That the God who gave you a mind knows everything? Do you not know that he has seen every secret deed you have ever done? He knows all the secret deeds of your quiet little heart. He knows your wicked thoughts. He knows your wicked ways. And this is a God of justice. Wow! This is a problem. Because we have a moral debt and we have nowhere to go to pay that moral debt. Why the cross? Romans 5, verses 6 to 8. For while we were still weak, morally bankrupt, unable to do anything to help ourselves out of this situation, while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. Oh, now it makes sense. That's what's going on at the cross. Why the cross? Because God punishes sin. And he will allow somebody to be punished in your stead. He will allow a substitute. As long as somebody pays the debt, you can be debt-free. Well, we were still weak. Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person. Who hears about that? Maybe when they go to war, somebody, does some heroic thing. Though perhaps for a good person, one would even dare to die. Yeah. People do give their lives now and again. But generally speaking, you don't do that for your enemies. You don't do that for the people you hate. But verse 8, but God showed his love for us in that while we were still sinners, let's say it this way, while we were still bankrupt and owing him exactly what is due from us, and while he was under no obligation whatsoever to ever do anything to lift a finger to help us, and while he had every right to let full and complete justice fall on the heads of every rebellious sinner who ignores his law, who rails against him, who lets their wicked heart rise up and say, God will not be my king. I will rule my life. I will choose my way. I will do what I want. And while he was right to let justice fall on every wicked heart, God, in his love, out of his own free will, chose to respond to his enemies in providing for them a way that they could pay their debt. That is why we celebrate the cross. That is why we rejoice at Good Friday. There was one who came to be a king, to rule and reign, not in a physical kingdom, though one day he will. We believe the millennium is yet to be. But he rules and reigns as king in the hearts of people, that he has conquered us. We become the territory that he conquers. We become the place where he rules and reigns as king. As we understand and submit to his kingship, to his lordship. Well, God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. This is the very language that he uses when he's on the cross. John 19. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scripture, I thirst. A jar full of sour wine stood there, so they put a sponge full of the sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. And when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. And bowed his head and gave up his spirit. There's something genuinely lost when we read that in English. It's 3 words in English. It is finished. Jesus didn't just say, it is finished, as if he was saying he was about to die. He actually made a declaration. It's lost to us in English. The original word is the word tetelestai. 1 word in Greek. This word is so rich and so deep, and it's actually borrowed from an economic kind of environment. For example, if you were asked to do something, if you were a servant, an employee, and you were asked to provide a service, you were asked to go and do something, you would go and do that thing, whatever that was, wash the windows, make the cake, whatever. You would come back and you would use that word. You would say, tetelestai, meaning the task that you burdened me with, I have completed it. I was at your service. I was at your disposal. I was your servant. Tetelestai. He was saying that in a sense to the Father. I have done what you have asked me to do. But it's more than just that. This word is also a word that is used in an environment in a banking environment where somebody owed money. And if you had borrowed money, you would get your bill and it would be written out what you owed, and you would come back and you would pay back some money, and the ledger would get smaller and smaller and smaller until finally you paid your debt. And then on the top of that page would be written the word tetelestai. And it means simply, in English we would say, paid in full. This is a word of economic transaction. It is a word that says the debt that was owed has been covered. The debt that they owe, that they cannot pay, I just paid it for them. That 10 cents that needs to come out of your pocket, I give you the 10 cents and all the other things that you need so that you can know what it is to be forgiven. Erwin Lutzer, in his book, The Cries from the Cross, a little short book on the 7 sayings of Jesus, says this, of this word, tetelestai. This means that my sins are on Jesus, not on me. Yes, there's sin within me, but not on me. My sinful nature keeps luring me towards sin, and even in my best moments, my works are tainted with selfish motives. But legally, I am accepted on the basis of the merit of Jesus. Figuratively speaking, I have a new set of clothes and a clear record in heaven. The righteousness of Jesus has been successfully credited to my account. God's justice has spent all its ammunition. There is nothing left to be hurled at us. Amen. Tetelestai. Romans 5, verse 9. Since therefore we have been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. Do you know why we sing and we talk about being saved? What does that mean to be saved? That means to be saved, to be set aside, to be rescued, to be kept. Do you know if you have a bushel of apples and you're going to save some out from making applesauce with them, you're going to eat these ones, you're going to save them from the annihilation of applesauce. Okay, bad illustration, same idea. God saves people. He rescues people. He sets them aside because his perfect just wrath is going to fall on humanity unless you have been saved, set aside, rescued, kept to the side, and Jesus pays your debt for you. You are rescued, you are saved from the wrath of God, the justice of God. Since therefore we've now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. Technical phrase, we'll not get into it. But the idea of it points us to the cross. Why the cross? It's because of who God is and because of who we are. So in the coming days and couple of weeks here, we are going to be talking about the cross and remembering and reminding ourselves of the goodness and the grace of God in giving us exactly what we need, because he provided that for us in his own mercy. And if I can just plead with any heart who believes in themselves that they are still righteous enough to stand before a holy God without the protection of the blood of Christ on your own soul, anybody who would be foolish enough to believe that this is just fine talk in some religious atmosphere, that this is for some mental derelicts who don't really understand life, could I just plead with you to open your heart to consider the truth of what I've said today. Examine these ideas for yourself. Examine the historic Jesus. Was he real? Did he make claims that are real to us? Does any of this mean anything to anybody? Does this change your life? Absolutely transforms a life. Any life who is willing to believe the words of Jesus will know what it is to be forgiven, to be transformed, to be rescued, to be redeemed, to be saved. And that is why Christ came. The Lord Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. He came to die for sinners. And if these words mean anything to your ears and you need to turn from yourself and your sin, then know that this cross is for you, that you can be forgiven, rescued, saved.